Director for the San Diego County Sheriff's Department. If you guys can please silence your cell phones, and I would like to introduce our Undersheriff, Kelly Martinez.
Thanks, Amber. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm Undersheriff Kelly Martinez, and it's my pleasure today to kick off this press release related to an assault, cold case, homicide. I'm really proud of the work and the creativity, the steadfast determination of the team of investigators and analysts who were able to bring closure to this case after nearly 20 years. This case occurred in Rancho San Diego, and it was solved by the use of investigative genetic genealogy. It's the first time a law enforcement agency in San Diego region has used this to identify a victim and arrest a suspect. I'd like to thank the San Diego Regional Task Force for locating and arresting the suspect in this case. And we also want to thank the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department and San Diego County DA's office for their additional support and resources. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sheriff's Homicide Lieutenant Tom Seaver.
Hi, my name is Thomas Seaver. I'm a lieutenant with the San Diego Sheriff's Department Homicide Unit. In that afternoon of October 5th, 2003, sheriff's deputies responded to an apartment complex in the 1600 block of Hilton Head Court in Rancho San Diego for a report of human remains found in a dumpster. When they arrived, they found a pair of women's legs in the dumpster. The Sheriff's Homicide Unit responded and assumed responsibility for the investigation. No other remains were found at the scene. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and determined the legs were that of an adult female. The cause of her death was undetermined, but the manner of death was homicide. Despite the medical examiner and the homicide unit's best efforts, the woman was not identified, and unfortunately, the case went cold. In June of 2020, the Sheriff's Homicide Cold Case Team, in cooperation with the medical examiner's office and the crime lab, selected this case to be worked utilizing investigative genetic genealogy. This is the first time that a case like this had been worked in our region. By December of 2020, the team had located the woman's adult son. Through further DNA testing, the woman was identified as Lori Diane Potter. The team is that Melissa?
That's it. Next one. Next one.
The team began an intense investigation into Lori's life. We'd like to thank the members of the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department for their involvement in this portion of the investigation. The team learned that in 2003, Lori was 54 years old, living in Temecula, and was married to Jack Dennis Potter. The investigation revealed that substantial and conclusive evidence that Jack had murdered Lori. On May 12th, the San Diego Regional Fugitive Task Force arrested now 68-year-old Jack Potter outside of his apartment complex in the 11200 block of 5th Street in Rancho Cucamonga. Jack was transported and booked in San Diego Central Jail for the murder of Lori Potter. Lori was never reported as a missing person. This case would have unlikely to have ever been solved without the use of investigative genetic genealogy. The Sheriff's Department would like to thank all the members of the public who cooperated in this investigation, as we couldn't have done it without you. Again, this is the first time in the San Diego region that a case has been worked utilizing investigative genetic genealogy to identify a homicide victim and then arrested the person who committed the murder. The investigation into Lori Potter's murder is still ongoing. The cold case team would like to talk to anybody that knew Jack or Lori Potter from the mid-'80s till present. If anybody has any information, please contact the Sheriff's Homicide Unit or Crime Stoppers. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Detective Troy DeGal from the Sheriff's Homicide Cold Case Team.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Cold Case Homicide Detective Troy DeGal. I was the lead investigator on the case, but there were other investigators and crime analysts that were crucial in solving this case with me. This specific case was different. We had solved 2 other cases prior to this, but they were where we identified suspects and then determined the suspects that they were deceased. So we couldn't pursue anything else but close the case. In this case, we identified the victim, Lori Potter. We initiated a homicide investigation. We completed the homicide investigation, identified the suspect, Jack Dennis Potter, and subsequently arrested him. I want to give a brief overview of investigative genetic genealogy so that the public is more familiar and it's easier to understand. Investigative genetic genealogy is really the merging of standard genealogy with the investigative techniques of law enforcement. They come together and you get the term investigative genetic genealogy. In the cold case unit, what we look for are cold cases that have been exhausted of all leads. Once we have a cold case that's been exhausted of all leads, we take a look and see if there's DNA from the suspect or the unknown victim, unknown suspect or the unknown victim. We upload those, and typically the DNA profiles have already been placed into law enforcement databases such as CODIS, just to see if the missing and unidentified victim has, her family or his family has put DNA into the system, or if the suspect's relatives or DNA is in the CODIS system for matching. Once that's a negative, we then process the DNA here in our crime lab, send that DNA off to a civilian or commercial laboratory, and they spin that into a raw DNA data profile, which can be uploaded to a genealogy database, which is public. Once that's done, this is where the public gets involved with law enforcement. I will contact, well, we end up with so in this case, let's talk specifically about this case. Lori Potter's DNA was sent to the lab. Then we uploaded it to a public genealogy database. I then got a familial match of somebody who's related to Lori Potter, but very distant, 3rd or 4th cousin away. We build family trees up with, and try to get a cross of two members of the family so we can determine the most common or most recent common ancestor, and that may be all the way back into the 1800s. In this case, it was. Once we're there, we just continue to build the family tree back down, excuse me, so that you have all the persons inside that family tree. When you get to the generation where Lori Potter should be, because we had an estimated age based on the legs, the year that we found the legs, what the medical examiner said, we know what generation she should be in, then we just do very much genealogy trying to identify where she belongs on that line inside that family tree. The closer we get and the more we deal with the public, we call the public, we get 100% from people within that family tree. I'll call them and I'll say, I'm Detective Troy DeGal, this is my case. One of your relatives is a victim of a homicide. I noticed that you're in Ancestry, or I will send you an Ancestry kit, and I need 100% consent from you. Will you participate? And I may be able to solve this case. In this specific case, every time I did that, 100% of the time, the public participated. And I was able to, after 6 months, identify Lori Potter. And then when I identified Lori Potter, we opened the homicide investigation and went back to traditional means of just doing my job and identifying the suspect. I'll turn it back over to Tom or Lieutenant Seaver.
I'd like to open it up real quick if we have any questions.
What led you to, I'm sorry, what led you to tie up the situation? Usually the first suspect in any homicide If it's a husband or wife, it's usually the husband or the wife. That was the first principle that you did, or how did you tie up to the husband, and how did you realize that he was a prime suspect?
Well, again, we, once we identified Lori Potter, we went back through her life and tried to identify who she was, where she was living, who were her friends or family during that time frame. And then we started conducting our investigation as a criminal investigation. So again, this is an ongoing criminal investigation, so we can't go into details, but we determined that there was a substantial cause to believe that Jack Potter had murdered Lori Potter. Yes, sir.
You mentioned every person you contacted gave you permission to do. How many people would that be?
In this case, it's going to be an estimate because the case took me 6 months of actually contacting people and coming through the, 6 months of contacting family members, talking to them, convincing them that my call wasn't a fraudulent call. That takes some time. And once I got all through that, I would say in this case it was probably 20 family members before I could identify her. In the previous cases I had, it was many, many more. So that was just a different dynamic.
When you do an ancestry history on a person who's participating with you, do they get to keep that data? Does that data go into a database that you all keep? Or what happens to that information?
That's a good question. So the database, it's not a law enforcement database. I'm using public, ordinary genealogy websites to build family trees. And many times I'll identify someone, look at, they've already been in Ancestry, 23andMe, all these other genealogy websites, and they will have a family tree. I take consideration of that, but know that that family tree may not be completely accurate, so I'll call them, talk through it, and make sure that I know what they believe is accurate, and then I work the family tree to make sure it is accurate, build my own family tree off of their DNA, their consent, upload it into other genealogy databases, and then I build my tree. I look at where my victim or suspect could be lying and move that puzzle piece around based on what's called centimorgans, just a centimorgan number.
And from those 20 to 25 people, what was the common factor for you to confirm that she was the victim?
The common factors, so it might be easier to understand. I do this triangle, and I've done that a million times to explain this to people. I get up to these grandparents, or their third or fourth level grandparents in the 1800s, and I come building down. And as you come down, you start to see who's matching closest way down here to your victim or suspect. Then I break it off into branches. It's an appropriate name for, well, it wasn't over here under this. These grandparents had grandchildren, and those grandchildren had grandchildren, and the numbers are low, they're out, and I just move over to the next branch, and I come down. So when I say 20, I'm bouncing from branch to branch, trying to narrow my scope of where that victim or suspect would lie. All of a sudden, you're going to end up with somebody who closely matches, a first cousin, and then you really narrow down. In this case, because it was a victim, very easy, because if I call you and I say, I need your help, your family member was victimized, they're on it. In suspect families, it's still, the public was about 95% participating, because they want to know if they have a homicide killer in their family.
Because at that time, nobody knew that nobody knew where she was.
Nobody knew, except for one guy.
When you want to do genetic research, do you ever contact the companies like Ancestry.com, 23andMe? What is their relationship or response or policy in terms of an inquiry from the police to share data?
That's a good question. So I follow Department of Justice has a guideline for IgG, investigative genetic genealogy. We follow that. On our department, we're even more stringent, where I can only press forward with 100% participation from the person I'm talking to. So I don't mess around. I tell them who I am, what I'm looking for, is the person a victim or a suspect, and will you participate? When they say yes, I move forward and I do everything I just described. I think I lost my train of thought.
How do the companies that have,
Oh, the
like
companies.
Ancestry, they have, they have a huge database.
Yes.
How do they respond to your request?
So I don't deal with the companies because I'm dealing with the public and the person, individual who's participating with me. So that person owns their profile within those genealogy websites, and they're working with me. They're doing the job. They have a right to do it, and I have a legal right to talk to them about their family. So that's, I don't deal with the companies.
I don't want to, it seems like you're dealing with two kinds of data, the genetic data and then all of the connections that you build that's related to the genetic data.
That's true.
So what happens with that data? What happens, so you have a family, you have a genetic tree
Mhm.
that goes back to the 1800s, as well as everybody those people are related to.
Yes.
So what happens with all that data?
It's in the, so the answer to your question is, on all of these genealogy websites, when you're in them, you can build a family tree, you can click on the person, and the website will actually recommend this might be the mom and dad. You know, take a look at the open source public records, and you decide for yourself if that's correct. That's part of what I'm doing, is talking to that person and saying, is that correct? And I can keep moving up. If I get to the point where I'm in the 1800s and people are like, I don't know if that's my great-great-great-grandpa, then we look through law enforcement databases, whatever we can find to try to validate that's true. Once I plug all the people in, as much validation as I can do through open sources and investigation, then I'm confident my tree is solid, and I go back down through the branches. When I'm all done, people who have participated, I share that tree with them, and I tell them, when I'm done, I'm just building a tree just like your tree. But I can pretty much assure you I'm going to go further than you're going. And when I'm done, I'm going to click on the button that says share my tree, and you get that tree. And they do, and they all appreciate it.
And of course, you keep it also.
I keep it, but have no more need for it.
I was just curious how many other cold cases you're utilizing this research for right now. Do you have an estimate, or?
I have an estimate. There's 4 cold case homicide detectives. I already told you that we previously solved 2. So I learned from the FBI agents who solved the Golden State Killer and the genealogist Barbara Ray Venter. They trained me. I trained my partners, and we solved those 2. Then I selected this one because I thought it was different and it was something I wanted to try. My partners all are assigned 1 to 2 genealogy cases each. And we share and we work as a team and try to solve all of them.
Okay, so there's 4 of you total.
There's 4 of us, and there's, I think right now, we're probably 4 or 5 active genealogy cases going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, have you shared this with the detectives who were working the case back in the day?
Yes.
What were their reactions?
Well, one of the detectives that worked this case back in the day just retired. He was my captain. So he was very happy about it. Everybody's, you know, this is a sad moment, and it's sad for the family of the victims, and that's what we care the most about. On the other hand, the victim's family, and I've spoke to them, are very happy that I, number one, identified Lori, because they thought she was just living and somewhere nobody knew. And they're extremely happy once they get over the grief of Lori being deceased that we've identified and arrested the suspect. So it's a bittersweet, but it's happiness almost across the board.
I'm new to this kind of business. So you have an arrest, but you also said the investigation is ongoing. Why is that, or how does that play out? How does that work?
Well, without talking about the investigation completely, the investigation is ongoing because up to the point where I've identified a suspect and I've arrested him, I've pretty much talked to all the family and friends with the exception of the suspect side, or else he would have known I was coming. So I got a lot of work to do on that side.
How old is her, you said her son's an adult now. How old is he roughly?
He's in his 50s.
Okay.
Does anybody else have any more questions? Okay.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. We appreciate you coming out, and we want to thank again the public's cooperation in this investigation. And we're very happy that we're able to announce the arrest of Jack Potter for Lori Potter's murder. Thank you very much.